Hey, so this week I kind of wanted to dive back into doing something that I wanted to do and making a video for me, and I saw this piece by Adam63 that a friend had sent me, and it is so pretty, and I loved the way that it looked. A friend of mine was recreating one of Adam's pieces in Houdini, and I thought, you know what, I'm gonna try to recreate one in Blender, and I think it came out pretty good. It's definitely different, and Adam's, in my opinion, is way better, way more detailed, but I'm really proud of what kind of came out of this. So yeah, let's jump into it. Just as a quick thing before we get into the video, thank you guys for 20,000 subscribers. I don't know, I don't want to like make a video or do the whole thing, but like, thank you. It's really cool, and you know, I've wanted to do stuff like this for a long time, and it's fulfilling and all those words and stuff. Yeah, so thank you, I appreciate it. So with all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and get started. First things first, we are going to start with our petals because that is really the main thing we're doing here today. And the petals are super easy. We're going to start with the cube, and we are just going to scale it on our Z axis, and we're going to pull it into edit mode, select these end vertices over here and kind of stretch them out a little bit like so. And we're going to take these bottom ones over here, and we're going to scale them on our X axis like this. And then we are going to add a little loop cut in the center. We're also going to add another loop cut right around here. We're going to exit edit mode, and we're going to come over to our modifiers, and we're going to throw a subdivision surface modifier on it. And we're going to crank that up to 3 or 4, something like this. Now, the reasoning for our edge loops is because we're going to be using those as places of manipulation along the object. We're going to be selecting our edges here. We're going to shift select everything. We're going to move them up a little bit so that we give it a little bit of like a wing here, kind of like a butterfly almost, you know, just because that's what we kind of want for the shape of our leaf. And we're going to edge select here. Let's actually go over into edge mode, select this, and I want to elongate this centerpiece so we have a little bit more rounding going on. So next up in our modeling, I actually want to set up a little bit of a structure here so that we can get a better idea of how we want our petals to look. We're going to drop in a circle curve right here and just leave it where it's at, just scale it up a little bit. And then on our main object, we're going to add an array modifier and a curve modifier. We're going to take our curve modifier and select the curve. And what this is going to do is allow us to increase our array so that we get petals that go around in a circle. We're going to set it to something like 6 and then move our X factor until we are looking like we're at an equal distance. And while we have this set up, we can go into edit mode and start adjusting our flower a little bit more. So first thing that I want to do is adjust the kind of curve of the flower. Because we have the subdiv on, we can kind of stretch this around and move it around however we want. And then when we exit edit mode, you can see that we have kind of the bowl shape of the flower petals kind of curling around itself, you know? Now for me, because these are the outer layers, we do want them to curve more outward than upward, I feel like. However, they're too wide right now. They look just like a little bit awkward. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this edge here and kind of stretch it out more, pull it up, see if we can try to get something that looks a little bit pointier. I think these kind of have an interesting shape, and all I did with this was drag this edge out here and then scale this edge and this edge. Sorry, Jesus, I can't click the right edge. It just won't let me. This edge here and this, never mind. You get the idea. Those two edges, I scaled on the X-axis. I'm not sure why it's not letting me grab them. But when we did that, you can see that we kind of screwed up our array a little bit. So we're going to play with this, get our shape right again. And I didn't show the scaling before, but this is the scaling of what I'm working with now. Nothing is to scale at the moment. Don't worry about it. We're just doing our base modeling. When it comes to particle systems, we'll play with that stuff later. That's not important for now. So now what we're going to do is we are going to duplicate these petals here, and we are going to scale them in like so. And then we are going to turn on our little tool here, our little guy, and maybe we'll disable the array for now because I want to try to pull this in like that and then turn our array back on. And you can see that just by like moving it around the circle layer, we can get kind of a change in the geometry because it's attached to this curve modifier, right? So what we're going to do is we are going to again play with our array modifier and our offset until we get it to something that looks like it's about equal, and we can go into edit mode again, and maybe we don't want this scaling going on anymore. At this point in the recording, I kind of just spent a long time playing around with different sizes and shapes for the petals, and the main thing that I wanted to go over is that you can duplicate animate more of these petals, throw them in an array modifier, and kind of move them around, change the geometry to get shapes that you like, and that's how I came to this shape here, which ultimately is what I use going forward. Once I had that base shape set up, I duplicated the petals again. I made these ones even smaller so that I could get like a thorny kind of look to them. After that, I jumped in on our center bulb object, and all that is a cube that I subdivided, and I moved some of the verts around a little bit to try to get like a cross beam section in the shape. Not super complicated, and you can see on screen, this is exactly what I did. Now, this is the point in the tutorial where I think it would be super important to save an incremental version of this file. I typically like to save everything in incrementals because if I change something and I don't like it, I want to be able to come back to a point where I know that everything can be adjusted. Super simple, just go File, Save As, and then hit this plus sign 1 or 2 times, and there you go. Now you have an incremental save. Do this all the time. It's so helpful. Now, the reason that I want you guys to save incrementally is because right now we're going to be applying the modifiers, and it is going to be useful to be able to come back to this project file later. And the reason we're applying the modifiers is because we're going to take these petals into sculpt mode so that we can add some more details, like this little crease up the center of the petal. You know, leaves kind of have that like veiny sort of look to it, and it just adds a little bit more detail to have that on all of them. And once you have that on all of them, we're then going to take the draw tool and kind of draw around the edges of our petals. That way there's like some depth and some breakup in the material. It's not all the same thickness, and it adds just a little more life and organic feel to the overall piece. And this is a part where like you can kind of take like a Bob Ross like painter approach where like you can't screw this up, right? You can't go wrong and like make this done poorly. It's not how it works. This is all just feeling it, and it's super free. It's super easy. Try not to get wrapped up in like making it look perfect, because nature doesn't look perfect, and you know, so nothing you make trying to imitate nature is going to look perfect. It's just not how it works. Once you've got all the details added to all of the petals, you might be noticing that you've got some weird artifacting slash, you know, like normals popping through and being flipped and being weird. It's not a big deal. We can easily fix that by coming up to the smooth brush. And then what you're going to do is you're going to turn the strength up on it, and you're just going to lightly go over all of the edges where you have this normal issue. It's just going to smooth everything out and kind of make things oriented the way that they're meant to be. Now that we have all of that situated, you might be looking at your flower and noticing that there is too much space. There's way too much space between the gaps, and this is where saving incrementally comes in handy, because we could append in other petals, and we can use this as much as we want to fill as many gaps as we need. So just go ahead and go crazy with that if you want to. Something else that you can do is go around and make a selection from the bottom of each petal, and then scale using proportional editing to make it so that those bottom leaves are touching our bulb. And that's also going to help with kind of the organic feel. It really makes it look like it is growing out of this bulb. Additionally, if you've done all this and you still need a little bit of space, what you can do is making another selection on the inside of each one of these petals and kind of scale them out to make them a little bit fatter, make them a little bit skinnier, kind of fit your scene however you need. Just feel free to go with it and adjust as you need to make your flower work for you. And after much playing around, this is the setup that I ended up with. I have some kind of pointier petals and some more rounded petals, and then on the interior, I actually made a selection along the top of those like smaller thorny petals to kind of pull those in. I felt that they didn't look enough like atoms, so I really wanted to adjust those and make them kind of pointed upwards and around the bulb a little bit more. Up next, we have what is probably the most unceremonious part of this video, and that is creating the little like tentacles that are coming out of the flower. And I initially wanted to do this with geometry nodes, but I could not figure out a way to do it. I'm a little baby when it comes to geometry nodes. Maybe one of you will know better and leave it in the comments, but I ended up just using curves that I added a little bit of thickness to, and then just kind of placing them willy-nilly and trying to not like make a pattern out of it, and just placing them wherever I could so that they looked good. So with that settled, let's start working on our particle systems. We're going to add a little bit of hair to this flower, and I'm not really sure how much hair is actually visible on flowers. Obviously they have that kind of like velvety feel to them, and Adam has some hair in his render, so obviously we're going to replicate that. So the first thing that we need to do is adjust our scaling. Let's go ahead and click A to select everything, and then scale everything down so that it is no longer the size of a truck. It does not need to be, you know, realistic the size of the flower in real life would be, but it definitely needs to be smaller than it currently is. So now let's get to work on the actual hair that is going to be going on this flower. And if you've been following me for a while, you will know that I have a belief with hair, and that it is you cannot get good looking hair with one particle system. So what we're going to do is start off with one particle system with relatively short hairs. We're going to interpolate them under the children's tab so that we have options to access the hair editing. And we're going to adjust our random a little bit so that it's got a little bit more frizz going on with it. Again, if you want these to look a little bit more realistic, you can up the steps once we're getting ready to render. Those will be under your render and viewport settings in the hair tab. That just gives you a little bit more kind of like wavy and like a little bit more geometry to the hair. However, it is heavy, so we're not going to turn it on while we're working on this. So on this first particle system, we really don't want these hairs to be thick at all. They're very, very thin is what we're going for here. So we're going to go to the hair shape and we're going to change this to something like 0.5. And we can even go thinner than that if we choose. We wanted to go with something like 0.3. And honestly, I think the hair is a little bit long at this point, so we're going to lower that a little bit using the length under the children's setting. Now the next step is a simple one. We are just going to take this particle system, we're going to rename it to base, and we are going to apply this particle system to all of our other petals, and this is going to function as the base particle system for everything. Going forward, we're going to start working on our second particle system, which is going to be these longer hairs at the tips of our pointed petals. I went into proportional editing and I kind of readjusted the shape of these a little bit just before I recorded this part. So if they look a little different, that's why. I just wanted them curved a little bit more. But what we're going to do is we're going to select the tips of these petals. We're going to add them to a vertex group. And this is going to be what we'll use for a density map for this second hair system. So let's go ahead and add our second hair system. And again, we are going to make this kind of a shorter one, but a little bit longer than the other ones. Because again, these are going to be stringy. And we're going to come down to our density and we're going to select the vertex group that we just made so that our hairs are only around the edges. We're going to turn the number of hairs way down, and again, we're going to select interpolated under children, again, to bring up our hair editing options. But you might notice looking at this that our hair system is pointed in the wrong direction, and we can fix this in two ways. We could go into the hair edit mode and kind of brush them all, but then we have an edit that's in place and it kind of limits us. I don't like limiting ourselves unless we have to. So something that we can do is under the advanced setting in our hair system, we can go into the velocity settings and we can play with our velocity settings until we get the hair to be pointing in the direction that we want. If you haven't applied transforms, it's not going to be the right axis more than likely. Just play around with them a little bit till you see which axis is the right one. If you have applied your transforms, you are a better person than me. As for the actual look of the hair, again, we're just going to be increasing our random under our roughness value, and we are going to be turning up our steps under viewport and render so that we get that stringier, more high poly look. Now we know from our smaller hairs that the default hair shape is a little bit too thick. However, these hairs we want to be even thinner than the other ones. So we are going to set these to 0.1. And if we go into rendered mode right now, you can see that they are very thin, very little. And if we turn on our other hair particle system, you can see that they are thinner than the other ones if I don't drag the camera inside our object. They might be a little bit long right now and maybe even a little bit too dense. We might be able to go down to something like 250 and reduce our length under the children's setting, something maybe like half of what it was, maybe a little bit more. Something like that. So with our long hair particle system made, I went through and I applied it just generally to all of the other petal groups. I didn't want it at the tips for all of the other ones. I just wanted a little bit more breakup in the particle systems we already had. And yeah, I think it looks all right. So next up, you guessed it, is another particle system. We're going to be working on the hair that goes on the end of these little antennae here. And what we're going to be doing is making a vertex selection in orthographic mode. And we're going to use the circle tool to select the tips of each one of these little antenna thing. Once we have our vertex selection selected, we're going to go and apply another particle system, hair obviously, and we're going to scroll down to our density and we're going to plug in our vertex group there. Now for the hair on this, I wanted to go for something that was almost reminiscent of the trees in the Lorax, where they're like very fluffy, and it's a little bit more fluffy, I think, than Adam's. I don't remember off the top of my head how fluffy his was, but I really liked that look in my head, so that's what I went for. And how I did that was, again, just by increasing our steps and by playing around with our random under our roughness, but this time I also used a kink. And in this kink, I used a curl modifier, I think is what it's called. And then I just adjusted the amplitude of that so that it's just barely starting to wrap around itself. And I thought that looked so good. After that, I just spent some time working on the length and the thickness under the shape of the hair. And I wanted to make sure that it was long, but not too long. And I wanted to see that it was like very thin, like cotton candy wavy, but I didn't want to be able to see the curves through the hair. That was super important to me. So super not thick, but also thick enough to cover my mistakes. And oh my God, we're almost done with particle systems. Just one more. We need hair on our bulb here. And this one is going to be fairly simple. We're just going to adjust the length till it's something like this. We're going to hit interpolated. We're going to change this to something like 50 perhaps. And then we are going to adjust our random. And that's probably about all we're going to do. We might adjust the size of the diameter root a little bit because it might be a little bit much. So maybe something like 0.5. And that'll probably be about it for that one. With all of these hair systems finally out of our way, we can start working on materials. So what we're going to do is we're going to set up a little basic scene. We're going to rotate our flower a little bit, set up some very basic lighting, and then we're going to dive into our materials. All right, so this is the camera angle I've chosen for this one. I've just got some very basic like temporary lighting set up. Come into the world settings and I turned the background all the way off. I do this because I like a lot of control in my lighting. I personally like relighting all my stuff like on my own. If you like using HDRIs, there's nothing wrong with it. Continue using them. They're super cool and you need them for a lot of stuff. But for this type of thing, I like to do all my own lighting. It's just my own personal style. So let's start working on the materials. For the petal, I have a material that I already created and did nothing with. So I named it petal. Let's go into our shader editor. So the texture that we use for the petals is going to be fairly simple. We're going to start off with a color ramp, and let's go ahead and choose two colors that we like. For me personally, I've been really digging purples and pinks lately. Obviously, I used them in the thumbnail render for this. So let's do that again. I'm going to go with like a light purple and then like a darker blue, I believe is what I went for the original. And how we're going to use those is by manipulating them with a wave texture plugged into a mapping node and texture coordinate. How I did that is with Control T, by the way. If you ever see people doing that and wondering how they do that, Control T to spawn those in. We're going to plug in our wave texture and we are going to change our scaling because right now we got a little bit too much wave going on. We're going to go with something like 1.2 around there. We just want kind of thick stripes running down our petals. Now you can play with your rotation values here. We actually got kind of lucky off the bat and we have these stripes that are running down immediately, but you can see it's not happening on all of them. Pick the flower, like the petal that you want to be as like the focus for this, I guess, and try to like aim to get that one perfect. You can play with your rotation values. We just want those lines to be running vertical on as many of the petals as we can. And right now they kind of are. However, you can also change the location, if you're not liking the way that they're sitting right now, you can kind of move them around and pick, where you want it to be. In the center could be cool. I kind of like that. If we hop back into render mode, we can see that this does not look very good at the moment. So we are going to add some subsurf to this. Not a ton, but somewhere probably around this is probably pretty good. And as always, we're going to play with our subsurf radius. Now the settings I used on the original one are 1, 1, and then I believe 48. I cranked it way up. Personally, I think we're going to have to change that probably, but we'll come back to that in a second. Right now, we are going to add some bump to our flower, and how we're going to do that is with a noise texture. So drop in your noise, take color to height, then normal to normal, and we are going to crank this up. We're gonna go to something like 200, but it's a little bit too bumpy right now, so we're gonna drop this down maybe to something like 0.3-ish for the moment. So right now, our colors aren't looking right. They definitely don't look like my render, and they most certainly don't look like Adam's render, and that is because he did something kind of interesting. He used very, very specific lighting, and you can see I've dropped in a second light here, and I've made it a little bit thinner, and what we're gonna do is just set it so that it's only hitting the tops of these petals, and because our subsurf is so high, the higher we crank up this, the more white value we are going to get in our flower. And if we crank this up to something maybe like 120, we start to get a similar look to what was in my original render and what is in Adam's render. However, you have to be very particular with these lights because you don't want to lose our shadows. So definitely do a lot of playing around with your light until you can achieve effect that is similar to this, where you're not completely blowing out your flower. So I've gone ahead and added our material to the rest of our petals, and I can tell you that right now it is not falling quite how I want it to be. And this is the part of the video where you're going to have to do some playing on your own because you modeled this all yourself and we're using generated from our texture coordinate. So without it being the exact same model, I can't give you the exact same numbers, right? You're going to have to do some playing around with your mapping and your wave texture until you land somewhere that you like. All right, so after a little bit of playing around, this is what I landed on. I ended up changing up my colors. I just wasn't really feeling those colors today. These are the settings that I use for my wave texture as well as my mapping texture. I went for more of just like a subtle gradient rather than the lines this time around. I also adjusted my subsurface radius. As I said, we were probably going to have to. You know, different object, different settings. Play around with this until you land on somewhere that you like. For me personally, I really like the way that this looks. So let's start working on our little thorn materials here. These are going to be much simpler. I just kind of want this to be like shiny, subsurfy kind of objects. And we'll probably make them like a, what color looks good in there? Ooh, pink looks really good actually. May even push it further into the reds. I'm really liking this. It's got these like warm tones in the center, but then because of the subsurf, we've got these purples and blues on the outside. And I don't know, I really like the way that it looks. It looks less flowery this time around, but it does look very cool. So for our bulb material, we're gonna go with something pretty simple, probably just, again, within that kind of red range. Maybe not quite, you know, that red. We'll see as we're playing with it. Ooh, actually the kind of like blood orange look looks very, very good. I like that a lot, actually. I was not expecting to like it as much as I do. If we go like a little bit lighter, maybe somewhere in here. We'll play around with it a little bit till we find a tone that we like, but orange I think is definitely the move. I think it helps ground it a little bit more with all the wild colors going on. We're going to name this material bulb, and we are going to add this to our little antenna guys as well. We want those to be the same material. And yeah, man, that looks so, so good. I also added the petal material to our outer petals here. Ugh, it looks so pretty. But I almost forgot, our petal material is not done there. We also want to add some speckles to it. And we've been playing around with a lot of different like speckles lately, and we're going to do this through a super simple means. We're going to add a noise texture. We're going to take this principled BSDF, pull it up here. We're going to get rid of our subsurf, and we are just going to make this almost entirely black, probably something like there, just a really, really dark gray. We're going to drop in a mix shader. We're going to go this into our top and our principled BSDF from down there into this, and then our noise texture is our factor. We're going to plug that into here. Let's drop a color ramp in between those so that we can kind of play with our sharpness values, and we'll drop that into our surface. Let's go into material mode real quick, see what this looks like, and right off the bat we're going to make our noise a lot smaller. So we're going to crank this up to something like that, and we are going to bring our points much closer together. On my last video, a lot of you pointed out that I can just use constant if I want to get pure black and white values. Very, very true, and I appreciate you guys saying it, but man, so many of you pointed that out, and I do know about it, and thank you. However, I wanted to leave it linear so that I can still adjust the fade levels. Again, I appreciate it, and I don't mean to sound like, you know, like an ass, but you know, like 50 people told me. I know. Thank you. I appreciate it. I do. But yes, this is how we're going to get our little speckles. And if we go back into rendered mode, you can see that we've got some little black speckles all over our flowers. Now there is one final thing that I want to do, and I want to add some water droplets to our petals. And how we're going to do this is super simple. We are going to drop in an icosphere. We're going to open up the settings to this, and we're going to set it to 1. We want as little geometry on this guy as possible. We're going to go into edit mode, and we are going to take this the centerpiece down here, and we're just going to move it up. We're going to turn off proportional editing while we do that, just so that it's kind of flat like this, and then maybe we'll scale it just a little bit like this so it's a little bit more flat even still. And we are going to shade this guy smooth. And we are going to put a very basic glass material on that. We're just going to set the roughness to 0 and our transmission to 1. And now we're going to use this guy as a particle system. So let's start off by throwing it on the big petals. Let's go ahead, add another one. We're going to choose hair again, but this time in rendered, instead of path, we're going to select object. We're going to use our little eyedropper tool and select our object here. And you can see it's going crazy. We do not need that many. We need maybe like 50. Something like that. Let's go ahead and scale our main object down a little bit till it's something like this. And you can even, if you need to, if it doesn't look quite right, you can drop some subdiv on it. It'll be all right. Don't go crazy with the subdiv though, because it will get heavy very fast because, you know, you're working with a particle system. We're going to increase our scale randomness to 1 and kind of mess around with the scale of the object a little bit. We can play around with our seed till we end up on one that we like. We really don't want at any point them to be like coming off the flower, you know, and 50 might still be like a little bit much. Maybe we go like 25. And there we go. This is a seed that I like. We don't have too many going on. I think we only have 3 that are visible on screen right now, but we're going to add this particle system to each one of our petals. Again, with your objects, this is going to be a little bit different, so we'll do some playing around with adjusting the seed values on each one. And yeah, I think we've landed somewhere that looks pretty good. I like it. And yeah, that pretty much covers everything for creating this flower look. From there, I spent a little bit more time just playing around with colors and lighting a little bit, and it didn't turn out, perfect per se, but I played with it. I had fun. I really liked the outcome. I like this one almost as much as I like the original, and that's interesting because this one went way wackier. It went way more I leaned into that Lorax feel that I was talking about earlier, and it went a little less realistic, but I still think it turned out really, really good. Thank you so much for watching and continuing to watch each week. I really appreciate it. If you are at all interested in these project files, they are up on my Patreon right now. And speaking of my Patreon, thank you so much to my patrons for making this possible. You guys have been very supportive over there, and it has been super helpful, especially lately. I can't express it enough. I really do appreciate it. It's very cool to know that someone likes your stuff enough that they want to purchase it for themselves, if that makes sense. It's a very unique, cool feeling that is it's hard to explain, and I really appreciate it. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again real soon.